sometimes game 1 can consume the entire 50-minute clock, especially if the players are not well versed at the pace you need to play at.
Are there any factors from the four-color Yorion days which you think don't translate over, where maybe if you haven't played this mirror since then, you would have to update those assumptions?
Yeah, well, oh wait, it appears that he's playing against Murktide.
Okay, okay. So also potentially a very grindy matchup, but one that I think is favored for Omnath. Although again, that might be something which back in the day, I think Yorion was an important card to have in the Murktide matchup to guarantee that that long game firepower. I don't know if the matchup is closer than advertised without it.
I'm not sure I still think Four Color is favored, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's a skill matchup. There's a lot of decisions on both sides. Like if a Four Color Omnath expert plays against a Murktide expert, I kind of think it's anyone's game. I don't. You will see the exact decisions the players make, but it's kind of a classic matchup. Murktide has advantage early, but can have some trouble going late. Four Color Omnath has trouble resolving its key cards. And we'll kind of see how it goes. I would say the fundamental tension of the matchup from the Murktide side is that Murktide kind of needs to stop everything. Almost any one of Mason's main threats will be incredibly problematic, while still presenting a threat. So it's kind of hard to have the right mix of threats and counter magic to make that happen.
Yeah, and Mark Stanton, 5-1 in this tournament with Murktide. So going up against a four-color expert, but may well be a Murktide expert in his own right here in round 7. So put Mason to the test with the Toman Ragavan. Mason did have the answer in Prismatic Ending. We will see what kind of follow-up Mark can present here.
Yeah, I mean, I love that play, to be clear. I think you should almost always just slam your wrong one. Far too often, for my taste, does Four Color have to end up evoking a Solitude on the Rogon and getting 2 for 1. So you definitely want to do that. Not going to work out here, but still a fine exchange for Mark.
Yeah, evoking Solitude feels like a necessary exchange there, but not one you're happy with. That is a way that you fall behind on cards, even in a matchup where so many of your cards draw more cards, and ideally you hope to outmuscle the Murktide deck on that axis.
Yeah, very much agreed. And see, okay, again, the biggest trick of the matchup is Four Color just has like a lot of bangers, right? Like if Teferi ever resolves, it's a huge issue. If Omnath ever resolves, it's a huge issue. If a hardcast Solitude ever resolves, it's a huge issue. And so Murktide has to work hard to make sure just none of that ever happens while still clocking. I don't know. It's kind of hard to get the right mix of stuff. But I think, between the Considers and the Surveil Scribes with DRC, if you are an expert Murktide player, you can thread that needle.
Okay, so Windswept Heath fetch Steam Vent, which is not a legal play, so we are going back into the tank to find maybe just a basic Snowcapped Island instead, or second green source. Okay. Unfortunate that I guess some amount of information was leaked in the process there, but looks like the game will continue as advertised, and we are going to draw from the Ice Bank Rattle to not compound this issue further.
And what I will say is this. Even if I think in general this matchup is kind of anyone's game, certainly playing the Ice Bank Waddles in your main is a huge difference maker here. Most people have cut those, which helps out Murktide. Mason still having them is a big deal. It is just a cheap, easy way to 2-for-1 them. It doesn't require you to resolve, an awkward card. It comes down at instant speed on the opponent's end step in their combat step whenever you need it to, really. Just a great card to have any time in the Murktide matchup.
Yeah, and both modes of that card, if you like, are effective here. So the 1-1 just trading with an early Ragavan, potentially a 1-1 Dragon Space Channeler, or as the game goes along, like that is yet another answer to a massive Murktide region or Ledger Shredder.
Yeah. And usually the way the games end when Murktide is winning is that at some point in time, the Murktide player will put a Murktide onto the stack with counterspell backup, and if that ever happens, it's usually lights out. It's just very hard for Color to present 2 answers in a kind of a single turn cycle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Mark pondering his Surveil here off Dragon's Range Channeler for the counterspell. Going to send another Ragavan to the bin. Makes sense in the face of a onboard Ice Bank Battle. And Mason going to use this opportunity with shields down to evoke Solitude, although that is his second spell of the turn, so Mark will get to connive with the Ledger Shredder that is on its way out here.
Yeah, I mean, again, Mason. This is a reasonable play for Mason. He's under a lot of pressure. He's at 10 life. His Ice Fang can't trade for that. I totally get it. On the other hand, Mark has to be ecstatic about this exchange. Getting two full cards and the connive is great for him.
Oh, interesting. So Solitude going to take down Dragon Space Channeler instead, it looks like.
I wonder why Mason wants to go after the Channeler instead of the Ledger Shredder. I'm trying to think about what that could imply about his hand.
I think the answer may be that he expects the Channeler to get to Delirium and to become a 3/3 this turn. So it's going to be a bigger clock, and it also offers a means of card selection. Whereas if Mason maybe has an answer for the Shredder lined up when he untaps, then maybe the Channeler does actually present a bigger threat in the turn cycle.
That could make sense for sure. I also do want to call attention to the fact that Mark discarded a Mishra's Bauble to the connive there. If you're Mark and you think your Shredder's on the way out, you're pretty inclined to discard a land if you have one, which I think is a show of quite extreme strength on Mark's part to discard that Bauble.
Yeah, so Jesse is on all spells, all relevant cards here. So Mason will go for iteration, and this will resolve. But this is not a I'm ahead, and this is going to put me further ahead iteration. This is I might be behind here, and I need this iteration to get me out of this hole.
Yes. In general, in the grinding matchups with four color, you kind of want to let your iterations cook as long as possible. You don't want to have to fire them off too early, and it's kind of a sign of weakness that Mason's forced to do this now.
And Mark has not found his own iteration yet. We'll see if that changes. If he can press his own advantage here. If you have something like a lightning bolt or an unholy heat, are you just firing it on the Ice Fang Rattle at some point?
I mean, you can definitely wait till it has Death Touch, right? You're not necessarily in a rush, but I am very willing as Murktide player to bolt Death Touching Quaddles, or Quaddles trading with relevant threats, I guess is the better metric. Like if I, for example, drew Rogavon, I'm probably going to dash in and bolt that thing very quickly.
So here's a question for you. Mark plays that Polluted Delta as his fourth land. Seems like he doesn't have any sequence like play a 2-drop, hold up, counterspell just yet. Would you be inclined to keep that land in hand just to potentially connive away?
See, I think that I would. I'm not sure what it means that he played it. Maybe he has multiple to an instance or something. I'm not certain. But it's like he has counterspell and lightning bolt. Yeah, I don't really understand that choice.
Yeah, see, now and I assume we want to keep this iteration, so now we just a milling a card essentially instead of, or maybe debating the timing here. But yeah, I have to assume we would want that delta back in our hand right now.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, maybe he's thinking like, okay, I know I'm going to iteration next turn because like probably Mason's going to play something worth countering, and given that I'm iteration next turn, I might want additional mana kind of on my iteration turn. But I'm not sure.
I do want to commend both players on their choice of Mercadian Mask's counterspells there. It turns out we just drew another Delta anyway, so we can connive that away. But Mason's stuck with 2 of those in his hand, and you're kind of seeing some of the tension here, especially in this matchup where the Murktide deck's curve is so low between, you have these big chunky sorceries like Omnath and these counterspells you just don't have a good window to cast if you're behind.
Absolutely, and it's for this reason that a lot of the four color players these days are completely eschewing counterspell and just being a tap out deck. Sometimes with Fable, sometimes with more elementals. There's a couple different builds that exist, but it's definitely awkward to be playing this. Iteration is awkward with counterspell. Omnath's awkward with counterspell. Counterspell is not that great a card in the four color deck.
Mm-hmm. So Mark Stanton going to pick up game 1 here against Mason. As we move into sideboarding, which deck do you think gains the most in the post-sideboard games? Because the thing about the Omnath decks is, with Murktide as such a big presence in the format, you kind of pick most of your main deck cards with a matchup in mind somewhat. And so even though, okay, maybe you get some endurances if you think those are good, you get to upgrade some removal spells, you're not making any big structural changes. Whereas if Mark gets access to, let's say, Blood Moon effects or cards like Subtlety, Dress Down, those could really be game changers.
Yes, I think Murktide gains more. I don't know if that's a hot take, but I think Endurance is like super medium in this matchup. Like, to be honest, when I was playing this matchup, I didn't always have all my Endurances even in. I thought they were very whatever. And on the other hand, Mark has some obvious cards that aren't very good. Like, I don't think Mark wants very many Lightning Bolts in his deck post board, and probably does have larger upgrades in the form of stuff like Subtlety's pretty good, Blood Moon's pretty good, sometimes more grindy elements can come in. Uh, Cheaper counter spells in the form of like Dispute might be there. Basically, I think Murktide usually gains more. So that's my opinion. I also know that some four color players do this thing where they try to punk out Murktide with Chalice, like play Chalice on one and kind of just like hope to ride that to victory. I have not been incredibly impressed with that plan when I have tried it, so I also do not board in Chalice this matchup, but I am not sure whether Mason is on Team Chalice or Team No Chalice here.
That seems like something that might change substantially on the play versus a draw, right? Where on the play, you chance for one, you have, I think, a much greater chance of locking out several cards, whereas on the draw, it's not clear if you even want to take turn two after play Chalice, and you might not be able to if you're facing down a Ragavan or something.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Mason might very play draw for sure. Although, again, it's hard. It's also hard to fit is another problem, right? Like, it's unclear exactly what cards Mason's going to take out in this matchup. Like, I imagine that the new Elishnorn, the Mother Machines, is going to go. It's kind of a clunky 5 that doesn't really do anything. I imagine if Mason has any Fury, they're going to go, but I think he has maybe 0 of that card. And I'm not sure what else he has to cut, really. Counterspell is okay. Maybe you could go down on counterspells, especially on the draw, but it's not really clear to me.
And we see, is that Ross Merriam versus Annie Antrazi in the back there?
Yes, it is, which I believe is Grinding Breach versus Tron, a matchup that I think generally you want to be on the Breach side of, but certainly if Tron brings enough relics to the table, they can make it competitive.
Yeah, a little surprising to see Tron doing this well, but it's in the hands of someone who is very well known for just casting big spells whenever possible. So if anyone's going to make it worse, like, make it work, excuse me, not worse, I guess it would be Ali.
I mean, I don't think Tron is very good these days, but I think it's not like, garbage or unplayable or something. I don't know, like, it's not that great against most things, but it still has its good matchups if you can find them. Like a lot of these mid-range decks aren't that great against Tron. Some of the Ragavan decks are a kind of a slow enough clock that you have time to do your thing and you don't care about their marginal value. I would say it's bad but not unplayable, I guess is where I'm at.
A solid tier 2-ish deck or B-tier deck or whatever the nomenclature is.
I mean, I think tier 2 is actually maybe too ambitious for it, actually, but yes, it's I don't know. You can make it work. Okay. Now Mason's going to be on the play. Going to have to win 2 in a row against this Murktide deck to achieve victory here. And yeah, I guess the question I am most wondering about is, did Mason leave in Counterspell? Did Mason bring in Chalice? Or does he just have neither of those cards in his deck?
And this hand is not going to answer those questions just yet. We do see a Tonal Witness still in the decks, and that is an angle which I know back in the day when that was a bigger part of the 4-color decks, people will try and de-emphasize a little bit against Murktide because it's a little slow, a little weak to removal, and not great when you're behind, but Mason still has enough faith in it, it looks like.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about Eternal Witness against Murktide. I left them in sometimes. I think it depended on my exact sideboard configuration. It's nice that it's a very cheap, grindy 2-for-1, right? Like, something you're definitely trying to do with this matchup is gain card advantage in a way that doesn't expose you with, like, expensive, easily countered threats, and Eternal Witness definitely does that. The biggest problem with it is just that, in some sense, the advantage comes in the form of a 2-1 body, and it's not clear that a 2-1 body matters very much. Right? Like, unless your opponent has Ragavan, the Eternal Witness isn't doing anything. You don't care about attacking them, and you can't block the rest of their threats. To be fair, though, I think Mason has at least one copy of Ephemerate, and obviously, if that's ever achieved, it is game over.
And this is where, if you're Mark, you are just hoping and praying that Mason does not have the turn 2 Renner 6, and he will breathe a sigh of relief there, and will get to keep the channel around and progress with the game.
Agreed. And I will say, it's definitely a tricky decision whether or not to play the turn 1 DRC in this spot, but I think it's usually a mark of stronger Murktide players that they are willing to do this at least some of the time. Like, look, you just jam it, you hope they don't have it, sometimes you get got, but not every hand can afford to just, like, play nothing on turn 1 and hope it works out.
And sometimes you can like dash Ragavan after that, finish off the Ren and Six, and continue playing the game from there. But that is one of the big swings in the game, and one reason why play versus draw does matter so much when Ren and Six is involved.
Yeah, although something I will state is that I feel like these days people say a lot like, oh, like play and draw is really important in Pioneer, play draw is really important in Murktide versus four color. I sort of think a more accurate statement is in Magic these days, play draw is really important. In all
Yes,
formats, in all matchups, it always matters. Like it's really hard to name one where it doesn't matter.
that is absolutely true. It just feels like it's staring you in the face more when your one drop gets killed by a turn two Ren and Six, when it would have been off of the races otherwise. But even in, I think back in the day, people would argue, is it right to draw and sealed a lot of the time? And that would be format dependent. And I think maybe it was always a little bit overstated and you should have played more often than people did. And some of it was just people looking for an opportunity to do that. But these days, I don't think you'll find anyone who would argue that you want to take the draw and sealed most of the time.
Yes, in fact, I can actually somewhat pinpoint when this happened as a limited aficionado. I remember in Battle for Zendikar Sealed, my team had a meeting before one of the Sealed GPs where we agreed that the answer to the question when would we draw, like in what matchups or whatever, was never. And since Battle for Zendikar, I am not sure I have taken that there has been a sealed format that is a draw format a single time. Um, that isn't to say that there might not be sometimes specific decks where you would, but it's never been the default.
And Mark's hand is set up really nicely for a longer game. Several strong reactive cards. We have the DLC to apply some amount of pressure, and then the iteration if we get a nice window to use that to pull ahead.
Hmm. I mean,
So
I like what's happening for Mark here. Although, wait, does Mason have a second green source?
Well, we have the Misty Rainforest, so we will need to find one. But yeah, I assume looking to set the trap with the ambush, or set the trap with the endurance on Mark's turn.
Yeah, so often when your opponent tries to set up this kind of endurance trick, your response as the Murktide player is to achieve Delirium, attack, and then when they go to endurance you can Unholy Heat with a trigger on the stack, and you keep your DRC. You do lose the graveyard, but you keep the DRC.
Yeah, Mason decides he can afford to wait on this. I'm not even going to maybe give any information away by tanking for too long during combat. Just going to take the one, move on with his life. We could even see potentially an end step endurance if he thinks that's a better place to pick that fight and not leave himself exposed to, iteration or blood moon or something post combat. Yeah, here we go.
Interesting. So I think Mason's doing this because he has Counterspell, right? Or is that not the case?
Well, Mason would not have. He wouldn't be able to counterspell this turn anyway, but he might have, a follow up play plus a counterspell to force it through if Mark has a second copy of his own here.
But I'm saying, like, what's the advantage of waiting until the end step to do it instead of doing it in combat? Right? Like, isn't it mainly that you have counter magic up during your opponent's main phase?
Yeah, so if there is a Blood Moon, I think it would be the big card there. But I'm not sure what else actually would even qualify necessarily. But I think given that it's 1 damage instead of 3, and you're at a healthy 13 plus life, you can afford to take the one and exploit your position if you like.
Yeah, agreed. Right, and now the haymakers are starting to flow. Mason's going to go for this Solitude on the opponent's turn, try to force Mark to commit a counterspell and mana, and then potentially untap and play an even bigger threat.
And notably with the Pixel Island, the Pixel Plains, and the Pixel Forest are very nicely insulated against Blood Moon.
Yes, it's definitely on Mason's mind. Smart call. Although, one nice thing about on the Murktide side of this matchup is your opponent never knows how many Blood Moons you have in, and kind of have to make decisions without that knowledge. Like, for all Mason knows, Mark didn't board in his Blood Moons, or doesn't have Blood Moons. But he still has to fetch around it just because it's such an overwhelming threat.
We see a copy of a really interesting sideboard card here in Subtlety for Mark, and that's something which the threat of it is kind of looming over the game at all times. And if you go for, you tap out for Solitude or you tap out for Endurance, hoping to catch them with their defensive sound, and they have the timely subtlety, that can really swing the game in their favor. But you know that most Murktide lists have 1, maybe 2 copies of that card. And so you can never really afford to play completely around it, but it's always just there. And I think that those high impact one-offs that don't require much commitment up front, very difficult for any players, even strong players, to play around with any kind of like balance frequency.
Agreed. But because this is all happening on Mark's turn, if Mark goes for subtlety in this spot, he's very exposed to Supreme Verdict. Like Mason can just untap and verdict his entire team away. I'm not saying Mason has that card, but from Mark's perspective, so it's possible Mark would rather just use the counter spell, get in for 3, and then hold up mana for more interaction rather than the kind of committal subtlety play.
That makes sense. I guess with the Murktide, there's some case for trying to bait a verdict on 2 creatures so that you get to play a defended Murktide later on. But as it stands right now, if you Subtlety the Solitude, Mason just puts it back on top, casts it again, and now you're kind of back where you started. So
I think Mark might also have a dress down, in which case he's playing to dress down the Solitude on the way back. I'm not certain though.
So he's tapping out for this Murktide. So if you're Mason and you have another Solitude, I assume you have to just go for it right away and not play into a potential dress down.
Right, and then wait, is he playing to pitch cast the subtlety on it? Then is that his line here?
Oh, we have we have that other dress down left in the tank. Okay, so yeah, Solitude plus dress down gives us a lot of options. And yeah, if Mason taps out for Solitude and Mark has Solitude, well, that's just game, right?
Yes, I think it is just game. Yes, to be clear, this hypothetical is all about if there's another Solitude, right?
Yes.
Because
yes.
The original one didn't end up being Solitude, but yes. I think this is a pretty reasonable play here. Basically, what Mark's saying is, okay, I have Subtlety, so like you can't resolve Omnath, you can't resolve Solitude, none of those things are outs, right? Once I do this, basically Mason has to have like exactly Supreme Verdict or like Leyline Binding, and if he doesn't, it's lights out.
Yeah, as it turns out, Mason has a newly drawn Prismatic Ending and a Leyline Binding and several other cards besides. So seems feasible that he can just clear up this battlefield from here. But I like Mark putting him to the test in that regard, I think.
Yes. I think this is another kind of important skill of the Murktide deck that I think a lot of people are reluctant to do. When you're playing Murktide against 4-color, you shouldn't be just like always grinding value and playing for the long game. Like 4-color is better at that game than you are. You should be sometimes just like putting the pressure on, saying, "Do you have it? Do you have it now?" And like if they don't, they lose. Also, I think Mason's list has literally 1 Leyline Binding. I could be mistaken, but that's what I believe his list has. Which means that, like, this was actually not a likely outcome at all. Mark did get kind of maximally punished, but I think played well.
Do we think the Leyline Binding is the 60-second card?
I think that Mason has stated that the 4th iteration is the 61st card.
Okay.
I don't know what the 62nd card is.
Yeah, I think Mason said he wanted the Black Source, the Zagoth Triumph, just to be able to ending for 5 against Elishnorn. And once you're doing that, well, because you have so many fetches and such ready access to your various triumphs, the Leyline Binding kind of comes along for the ride.
Yeah, that's fair. In a sense, if the 6th card is what you're saying. Yeah. So now the question is, okay, Mark's definitely behind. Mason is up in cards and the board is stable, but things aren't over. The question is, how does Mark come back from this? Like, what is his path kind of back into the game? How can he make progress without being overly exposed to Mason's like expensive spells?
This is a nice start. So we're conniving away. All of our spells are kind of situationally good at this point, and we're drawing another card off Connive, so we'll see what Mark pitches away right here.
I assume if he drew a land, he would easily pitch it, since it's not unlikely this iteration ends up playing a land. So I would guess that it implies he did draw a 3rd spell.
Okay, Subtlety down. Which, again, like, it's there, and you know it's not there, so not really living up to its name anymore, but that's fine. We can move on. So I think because Mason doesn't have any ongoing source of card advantage, he's not really gaining anything turn by turn as the game goes on. So it can present this steady stream of threats, and, you know, we have the first Ledger Shredder there, second one off the iteration. Looks like we're opting for the Blood Moon with that instead. But if Mark can just present threats that Mason have to answer, Mason might just run out of cards. And that seems like a very plausible way this game can end.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're wait. Does he have a land?
Wait, so we took. Was there a consider in that iteration pile?
Yeah, I think there was. I'm very confused.
Oh wow, this is devastating. So Mason goes for prismatic ending on 2. You see the little nod, shake of the head there. Gets it spell snared, where Mason could overpay with the same color of mana and ending for 4/3 technically with 2 colors involved, and still exile the shredder there. So yeah, that's brutal there.
Wait, so I think Mark may have intentionally not picked the consider to leave spell snare up. Is that what happened?
It is, and it got paid off massively as a result.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure if I would have made that play, but I do see some logic to it. I mean, he might just be trying to ride this Ledger Shredder all the way to victory. I
I
mean,
mean,
it's a 3/5.
but Mark knew about the ending coming back from the Eternal winners, but even with that in mind, if Mason has Spellsnare on his mind, well, then Mason has an easy way to play around that. So I guess maybe with a card like Iteration in the mix, Mason has more good 2 drops you want to tag on Mason's turn, but even so, I mean, impressive to take that gamble and have it pay off so directly and so immediately.
I don't think Mason is supposed to play around the spell snare there. I mean, like most Murktide lists have like 1 or 2 spell snare, and like has another good 2 drop to be cast that turn. He also needs a lot of mana to make the iteration maximally good because you really want to go spell from it here. You don't want to go spell land from it here. Uh, so again, I think it's right for Mason to play into it. But Mark also may know this right for Mason to play into it and therefore leave it up. There's quite a complicated sub game here.
Okay, so here is what is almost surely a lethal Murktide region, and don't know what Mason's last card is, but it's going to have to be an exact answer to Murktide right now.
Yeah. This is a very well played game by Mark. I think he's going to manage to pull it out in a game that I think a lot of Murktide players would not manage. Uh,
So if we go back to that iteration, we had Blood Moon, Ledger Shredder, Consider. There is a world where he takes a Ledger Shredder in his hand, exiles a Consider, plays a Consider, gets the first Shredder ending, fair enough, but then has the second Ledger Shredder as backup because this Blood Moon does not seem like it's going to have an impact on the game one way or the other. So I guess we can quibble around that, but yeah, I think everything else Mark has really paced this very nicely.
that's fair. Yeah, the Blood Moon does seem like it's not that great a pick. It might have been better for him to have like the Consider in hand and like still hold the spell snare, where like you can snare and you can consider if you don't need to cast the snare, something like that. Although I still think Blood Moon might have a chance of being factful. Mason has only, or is that 1 basic, 2 basics in play? No, I guess he's the full 3. Never mind. Okay, so the Blood Moon does look pretty bad.
I think one big thing is that because Mason doesn't have 2 basic planes, at least as far as we know, Blood Moon definitionally cuts him off hardcasting Solitude or Supreme Verdict, which he just drew off the top there. Wow.
I mean, that is the best draw in Mason's deck in this situation. So
Is that the 60-second card? Probably not. I'm going to ask this about literally every draw from this point, so please be prepared for that.
well, to be fair, this could be one of the sideboard Supreme Verdicts. So, like, in that sense, it could be the 63rd card.
But when you put it like that, and then Mason is even going to have the Renaissance plus Triumph engine kind of building his own Howling Mine going forward here.
Yeah, he does have all lands, but somehow I don't think that's going to be too much of a problem for him.
Well, you see, when Renaissance gets to its ultimate, it allows you to convert those lands into relevant game pieces, and that is only a turn or two away at this point.
I do also like the tilt value of making Mark think that he drew the Supreme Verdict off the cycling land.
Oh, love it. Yes.
Hmm. Mark still's not out of it. If he feels like an iteration here, I mean Mason's at 5. Although one challenge is I suspect Mark doesn't have many lightning bolts left in his deck post board. Like maybe 2. I doubt more than that, and could be 0. Like DRC, Blood Moon, and a blue card are Mark's 3 hands, I think. Um, DRC is pretty good. It's a 2-turn clock. Does also kind of blank all the fetch lands forever. Blood Moon is a surveil.
Is there a Boseiju or Odawara or anything like that for Mason?
I don't think Mason has a channel land in his graveyard. I'm not sure about in his hand. Mm-mm. Oh, is that not Delirious? Oh, God. Okay. In that case, Mark is in huge trouble. I sort of assumed out of hand that it had Delirium.
This might have been the old cast my non-creature spell, hope to surveil the 4th type away, and then once you miss, it just becomes target practice. But okay, I mean, Dash Ragavan, try and get Cycle in response, sure. But assuming no answer, I mean, this is a 2-turn clock in its own right.
It's 2-turn clock that might also get a card along the way.
And yeah, Mason has to pitch cast Solitude because Blood Moon cuts him down to only 1 planes.
Yeah, but this isn't like the pitch cast of like, I'm so sad I have to pitch cast. This is a pitch cast of, I mean, yeah, it's a 2-for-1, not in my favor or whatever, but I have Ren and 6 cycling going, like, I'm way ahead. Like, it's nice that Blood Moon did that, but I'm still not sure it's gotten a full card's worth of value, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Mason just gesturing out the trio. I mean, like, we all know what the deal is here, and these games have gone long again. Like, might be running low on time. You know, keeping it crisp, keeping it moving.
You have to be able to take your physical game actions incredibly quickly to play 4-color high-level events. It is simply a necessity that moving the cards around the playing surface not take much time.
You also need to be skilled at cajoling the opponent into playing at a reasonable pace without making them kind of have a tantrum and play even slower as a result.
Yeah, that is definitely true. There's kind of a social aspect to playing this sort of deck, but it can definitely be challenging at times.
So yeah, here is another lethal Murktide region, and I think Mason has a second Verdant in hand, which once again is uncast.
I think the Murktide isn't lethal.
Oh, it's just a 3/3. Okay, so that's 2 more cards potentially for Mason, and even just a naked lightning bolt would take it down.
Right, but if Mason doesn't have that and the verdict's uncastable, I don't know. I mean, I think Mark is going to attack Mason. I don't think he's going to go after Ren and 6.
Well, he's definitely attacking Mason now. And there it is. Yeah, Mark Stanton going to take this down, move up to 6-1 here in our tournament. And keeping in mind the structure here, this is not the usual thing where your second loss would eliminate you from top 8 contention. This is a 2-day event, lots more Magic left to be played. You do have to, I think,